All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of LSU Sports Update from the Advocate. I'm football writer Wilson Alexander, joined as always by my colleague Leah Vann. Leah, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Busy. How about you?
Oh, same old. Absolutely. It is obviously LSU coming off a big win last weekend, 31-16 over Mississippi State with that big second half comeback, really, especially in the fourth quarter. Just kind of wore down Mississippi State. Heads into New Mexico this week. Obviously, sort of like the last softer game on LSU's schedule before the SEC slate really ramps up. So we'll spend most of our time kind of looking back a little bit more on Mississippi State with an eye toward how things affect LSU moving forward over the next month or so. Brief summary of New Mexico. You got another sort of Rocky Long defense, that 3-3-5, kind of like what Zach Arnett used last week at Mississippi State. Brian Kelly said that's going to be tough. But the point spread on this game is about 29 and a half, I think. And so LSU expected to win big against New Mexico, which, though maybe has improved since last season, still had the worst scoring offense in all of FBS last year. And so this should be the kind of game where by the fourth quarter, hopefully for an LSU fan, you're up by about 4 scores and starting to see some backups get into the game. We'll get into the show later and sort of talk about the defense, how good that unit can really be, coming off what was a really impressive game against Mississippi State. Talk about some offensive line and the freshmen who really stood out there, and then Jaden Daniels as well. But I want to start here with Jack Besh because there's been a lot of questions about where LSU's leading receiver from a year ago has been through the first 3 games. He's only got 2 targets, 2 catches. One of those was a 17-yard touchdown diving in the back of the end zone against Southern, but he really has not been on the field a ton. He's been playing. There's been some moments where he's even been open and just hasn't gotten the ball. But he hasn't been a heavy piece of this rotation yet, and has not really made much of an impact. So Brian Kelly said today that should probably start changing this week. That as coaches, they have to get him more involved. Quick background before I throw this over to you, Leah. Besh is coming off a stress fracture that sort of limited him for most of the preseason. And so for the first few weeks of the season, Brian Kelly said that was still sort of, they're working him back slowly from that. But now it's been a couple of games where you wonder where he is. So, Leah, how do you see Jack fitting into this wide receiver rotation? Like, there's so many guys that are good, and talented. LSU maybe almost has like a good problem to have here, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, we know it's been a strength. It's been a strength for weeks now. And if Jaden can find Jack, then, that's just another stronger target, a much more physical presence kind of. I almost see him like being pretty beneficial if he lined up as a tight end. I know he has experience there too. Just because he is a little bit bigger in stature, and he could maybe be one of those guys who can operate in like the slot position or even, in the flats and kind of compete and get a couple extra yards when guys are trying to bring him down. But yeah, as you said, I mean, I look back, he was only targeted once against Florida State, and he did have, I think it was a 5-yard reception. And then through the past 2 games, he was targeted twice total. So it's just been kind of, I don't know why he hasn't been as involved, and maybe he hasn't been as open, but he also hasn't played as much. I think I wrote about this today in just a short little brief I put online, how many snaps that he's played too. And it's just that I can't find it right now, but yeah, so he's just hasn't been on the field as much. So I thought it was interesting today when we spoke to Brian, and that he said, we just need to get him more involved. He's perfectly fine. So I don't know if you were surprised by that answer at all.
Well, I want to the tight end piece that you mentioned is interesting, and let's pull up the question that we got today on Twitter about that. Someone asked me, so why move him from tight end when we were so thin there? A year ago, Jack Besh was LSU's tight end, essentially. He would play really close to the line, chip defensive ends, and then kind of break out. And that he was essentially, a tight end, though undersized, and he played well at that spot. But Jack himself was really excited about kind of going into this year. LSU flexed him out as of just a true receiver. Last year, he was in the tight end room. This year, he is in the receiver room every day at practice, and he is playing, the position that he always played in high school. He's never been a tight end. But some people were wondering, the way that they're using Mason Taylor as a sort of a primary pass catching tight end, what if you just put Jack there? I think they want to get Mason Taylor and develop him more. he's bigger body. I mean, he's 6'5", 245 pounds. Jack's 6'2", and he's well built for his height. But Mason is somebody who could end up becoming a tight end, like a true tight end, which is what they want in this offense over the next couple of years. So that's probably why Jack is still out at receiver. But it will be interesting to see if maybe they kind of get him involved in some similar route patterns as you would to a tight end, or if they just kind of find a way to get him involved in the rotation. Which is kind of what Brian Kelly said, is that they just have to be very intentional in that, in a really deep and talented room. Obviously, Jaden Daniels, it would have to find him the ball at all. And I think that kind of leads into our next topic here. Brian Kelly, I think, had a really interesting response on Monday when asked about sort of how much do you want Jaden Daniels to run? And it was this interesting sort of idea of the push and pull with him. Is he striking that balance well, do you think, in terms of being a runner and a passer? Like, just sort of what are your thoughts on kind of where Jaden Daniels is right now, and getting more into Brian? I'll pull up Brian Kelly's full answer here in a second, but I want to hear what you think about it.
I think if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If he's getting the yards, he's getting the first downs, he's getting touchdowns, like that's just his style and that's what he's going to do. And I thought what was interesting about Brian was saying, you know, we're not going to tell him to run less because then he'll start thinking more about it. And then he's going to question his own intuition, question his own thoughts more. So I thought that was really interesting. Is we're going to evaluate how he goes through the progressions, right? Like, is he just not seeing everything these plays through? Is he not like really looking for his receivers and just taking off and running? Or is nobody open and he's making something out of nothing, which I thought was really interesting. And so I even went back and looked. I've kind of looked so far through the 3 games that he's played this year. I mean, obviously, he's run the ball on 29 attempts for 264 yards. And out of those 264 yards, 233 have been on a quarterback scramble. So, you know, kind of rolling out and then making something out of nothing. You know, and then it's got the directional breakdown. And I think the left side tends to be, the left end tends to be like kind of his strength, but, you know, running there's a difference between running purposefully and then also just kind of waiting for the play to develop and then all of a sudden just taking off and running. And that is what he is doing the majority of the time. And so I think it's like 69% of the time. And so I think that's pretty interesting, but you know, I think it's working. The only concern, which I think you have a concern with every mobile quarterback, is can he stay healthy doing this for every game?
Yeah, I think everything he said there is spot on. I'll read out part of Brian Kelly's response here. He goes, you want to be careful where you go, hey, you're running too much. And then when he needs to be dynamic, he's not. We have to be very careful and along the way keep coaching him to really do a great job of getting through his progressions and seeing the things necessary that allow us to be balanced in both. Because, yeah, it's such a fine line with him that dynamic rushing, I mean, that rushing ability is dynamic. And it's something that you don't get with every single quarterback. And it has really saved LSU at times. And, you know, 48 of the yards on that final drive of the first half against Mississippi State were him just scrambling. Like you said, they run everybody deep. One of LSU's best plays is run everybody deep, let the corners turn their backs, and Jaden just takes off. And It also probably helps, Charles Turner was saying, a little bit with the pass rush, because defenses have to be more conservative with that because they know if they get out of their pass rush lanes, Jaden can just find that little tiny gap and take off because he's so fast and slippery really too. He's really smooth as a runner. But it is interesting. They do need to get him more sort of developed as a passer. And I mean, that's just something that's going to come with time. But I do think at a certain point, you kind of just have to appreciate what you have. And while continuing to, develop him and get him better in areas, like you were saying earlier, he's really good at this, at running. And it brings something to LSU's offense, especially with the offensive line that we'll get into here in a second, sort of still kind of finding its way a little bit. It really is helpful in that regard. And it's something that not every team has. And so you might as well try to find a way to utilize it and sort of just appreciate what he can do instead of maybe harping on what he can.
Right. I thought that was interesting yesterday. We talked to Charles Turner, who, as everybody knows, plays center right now. And I love the fact that he was saying, it does make our jobs easier, which anything that can make this offensive line's job easier is probably ideal right now, right? I mean, this is a very young offensive line. It is still developing. They're still trying to find that cohesion. So if Jaden is able to kind of play to his strengths and make their jobs easier so that, he doesn't have to rely on them as much. And then, the defenses are just kind of collapsing. I think that's an advantage. I think that's something that LSU is doing almost on purpose, right? I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's been helpful. I think that's probably the perfect segue into the offensive line question and just sort of discussion. We saw 2 true freshmen at tackle. I mean, that when you talk about the youth, LSU, Will Campbell and Emory Jones starting at left and right tackle respectively. First time since at least 1985 that LSU has started 2 true freshman tackles in a game. And it's probably the first time in program history, certainly in the modern era, but that's just how far records go back for them. It's 1985. It's what Todd Pollitt's, the great stat guy over there at LSU, said after the game. And they played great. Will Campbell was, I think, the highest graded tackle in the SEC by Pro Football Focus. Emory Jones was 4th on the other side. They were just stoning guys that Mississippi State had. Mississippi State has a pretty solid defensive front, but also says kind of where the offensive line is, that you're having to start 2 freshmen at tackle. It's going to be interesting, I think, to see what they end up doing now that Anthony Gard is back from a 1-game absence. He wasn't injured, but it was a coach's decision, didn't play and against Mississippi State. But he had, had 2 games at right guard. They ended up moving Miles Frazier in at right guard for the Mississippi State game. It was funny today, LSU put some pictures out from practice, and I'm like zooming in, trying to figure out who's at right guard and who's at right tackle based on like this little picture where you can't even see the numbers except for like a single number 5. So okay, maybe that's Emory Jones at right tackle. It probably should be, right? These 2 freshmen have been great. What do you, I guess, expect to see on the offensive line against New Mexico specifically?
Yeah, I think it's these freshmen are by mid-season are going to look less and less like freshmen because they're playing all these reps, and I think it's if you are an LSU fan, you should feel very confident moving into the subsequent seasons, right? Because you have these guys who are playing right now as true freshmen and forming this chemistry, especially with sophomores at the guard position, and you got a junior in the middle. That means just good things for next year, right? The best offensive lines that we have seen are usually ones that have played together for more than one season. For New Mexico, obviously the similar style defense. So I think that, they will be up for the challenge. I think it is interesting. It is incredibly rare to see true freshmen because usually they aren't fully developed, right? They don't have their physique fully built to the college level. They don't have, the body. You think about, we were talking about this with the defensive lineman, Jacobian Guillory, and he was talking about, getting that muscle percentage up and that fat percentage down. And those are the bodily changes that you have to purposely go through as both an offensive and defensive lineman going into your collegiate career. And not just that, but also you're up against bigger, more technically sound guys. And obviously Will, he distinguished himself from the spring, but Emory to step into that position, I think is even more impressive because he's more recently made a name for himself and more recently earned his spot there. And I think, it's good that they have games like these against New Mexico, against Southern, that they can just get those reps. Because then later this season, when they go up against a Bama, they go up against these bigger guys, I think that they'll be a lot stronger and a lot better. But it is incredibly rare to see what we're seeing.
Yeah, not only those 2, Harold Perkins and then Mason Taylor. We kind of touched on Mason Taylor earlier, what he's doing at tight end. We got a story up today on the Advocate's website about kind of his backstory a little bit and kind of getting into what made him the tight end that he is at this point. Someone who LSU is trusting as a true freshman to go out and play. Harold has been so interesting, and now kind of I think start moving us toward the defensive question or discussion. The way that they're using him. Matt House is got him sometimes lining up over the A gap and rushing that way, or or Matt House will overload a side and Harold will rush right next to BJ Ojolari. They got a sack that way against Mississippi State to bring pressure that way. He's also just lined up kind of as a middle linebacker and just played your traditional linebacker. He's been really, really good. You can see why he was a 5-star, but it's just interesting the way the LSU might use him moving forward. They've kind of got this rotation of linebackers, but does Harold, you think, maybe start playing more toward the line as a blitzer? Brian Kelly said this week they kind of found his niche that way. Or does he – I don't know, what do you kind of see his role looking like moving forward? Because I think they're probably going to continue to use him primarily in blitz packages and dime and nickel. while he continues to develop in the middle.
Yeah, I think as a kind of this edge rusher hybrid position that he's playing with him and BJ on the same side, and I saw that, and like this weekend I was like, oh no, like I would be terrified as a quarterback, because the thing about Harold is he's incredibly fast. And that was something that we even saw when he was at the middle linebacker position. I think that's when he got his sack. He just powered right through. And so I think everybody has said to us so far, what stands out about him is his speed. And so I think that, I think we're probably going to primarily see him out on the edge, like you said, for the rest of the season, and then just kind of taking reps at middle linebacker as they become more and more comfortable with him in that position. And, I don't know if I would see him against like playing middle linebacker against like some of the tougher games down the stretch with Arkansas and with Alabama and even Tennessee. I would see him more as like kind of appearing when you need to put pressure on the quarterback. And that's going to be emphasized. But I think when you've got games like New Mexico, we might see him a lot more in that middle linebacker position, because then he can get more experience that way, and kind of develop the smarts and the calls and the communication skills you need to play that position next year. What do you think?
No, I agree. I mean, he is certainly a linebacker of the future for them. Whether that ends up being at a jack linebacker or as a true middle linebacker, we'll see. I think he probably projects more as a middle linebacker. He can do so much out of that spot. And, he wears that number 40 like Devin White used to. And you don't want to put that on him just yet, but I mean, he's showing that he could turn into that kind of presence in the middle of a defense because of his speed and his athleticism. And he's already like 6'2", 220, and he's only going to continue to get bigger with the more time that he spends in LSU strength program. He's been really phenomenal. Like you mentioned that the rush right up the middle, he kind of used his eyes to redirect one of the offensive linemen and then just blew past a running back to get to Will Rogers. And it was an impressive sort of display and blend of speed and athleticism, and also just those intangible qualities and the football IQ that most freshmen don't have. And that's why you're kind of seeing him and Emory and Will Campbell and even Mason Taylor playing so much so early, is that LSU trusts these guys. They're also at positions that were a weakness coming in, and so LSU's throwing them in kind of right away. But I mean, these are guys you're going to see on the field for the next 3 years and turning kind of into cornerstones of a rebuilding program. And so it's good to see them playing as well as they are this early. Do you think we see another freshman, before we move on to the defense, do you think there's any other freshmen who could get on the field and contribute, maybe not quite to that degree, but in some sort of significant way this season? I don't know if there is one other than maybe Quincy Wiggins.
Yeah, I think Quincy has definitely been brought up, and obviously the special teams capacity is always also always a possibility, and probably where a lot of these guys have been getting reps. I thought what we saw a lot of in fall camp was LaTerrence Welch in the secondary, true freshman corner. Granted, the secondary is super, super deep right now, but I think that we could see a little bit more of him against like these games like New Mexico, or, later on the other non-conference game that is escaping my mind right now. Ooh. Yes. So I think that you might see a little bit more of him, because I felt like, and correct me if I'm wrong, or also like feel free to chime in. I felt like we saw a lot of him in fall camp with like the third team and like even the second team reps.
Yeah. He was definitely getting in there. And I think part of that might've been, Seven Banks was still very limited in fall camp. And, Brian Kelly said the Ohio State transfer should make his LSU debut this weekend. He was dressed out against Mississippi State, but he did not play a snap, didn't get on the field. He had a hip injury at the end of last year that caused him to miss the last 3 games. And, LSU's doctors were comfortable with him and medically cleared him coming over, but it's still taken him a while to recover. And he's got to knock off some rust. But that is interesting, like with LaTerrence, a game like this, a game like UAB, any other sort of games where in the fourth quarter they're either up by a lot or possibly down by a lot too, would be good to get him on the field, because some of these transfers that they brought in, like Jarek Bernard-Converse and even Colby Richardson and McCarthy, I mean, these guys are older. I mean, Jarek, this is his last year of eligibility. Seven's a senior as well. And so they're not going to be around for more than a year or two. And so you got to start kind of getting some of these younger corners developed, so that isn't a problem again in the future where we have to bring in a bunch of transfers and as almost like mercenaries, kind of the way they are this year.
That's the advantage of that 4-game redshirt rule, right?
Absolutely.
Like you can play in 4 games and maintain that red shirt. Brian Kelly was asked about that actually today on the SEC teleconference. While he didn't have that much of an opinion, he was like, well, it is kind of good that you can get those guys out there and get them some playing experience, and then you can still preserve their red shirt. So I think, like, to me, like the freshmen we're going to see outside of the group that we have talked about, as far as, you know, Mason Taylor, Emory Jones, Harold Perkins, Will Campbell, I think we're going to see them in more of like, we're going to see them in those non-conference, like 4-game reps, and then they're going to maintain their red shirt status, but it'll still be kind of fun to see some new names out there.
Absolutely. And I think we'll wrap this up then on that. We're already on the defensive side of the ball. We'll wrap it up there. They were really good against Mississippi State. I don't think that can be overstated, frankly. I mean, the way that Matt House, the defensive coordinator, he deserves a game. He got a game ball, and he deserved it because of the game plan that he drew up, was disguising so much against Will Rogers. You know, he thought that they would be in like a too high safety look, and then they drop into cover 1 or vice versa. You know, there was one timeout in the fourth quarter. The last time Mississippi State went for it on 4th down, where LSU appeared to line up in, I think, man coverage. Mississippi State calls a timeout. They come back out, same sort of look, and then LSU's in zone. And he throws an incomplete pass. Jay Ward breaks it up. And so it was a great game plan on his part, brought out a lot of pressure as well. Obviously, I think we've touched on that defense a lot. And so I want to sort of project it further. Is that you think what we'll see from this defense the rest of the season? Or is it maybe putting too much on one game to expect that kind of a performance throughout the rest of the year?
Having talked to Matt House, and I wrote a story on him like about a month ago, he loves that idea of mixing looks. And that's what all the other coaches he's worked with have all said, that, like, yeah, because he has coached every position group throughout his career. He's coached linebackers, defensive line, like the secondary, he's coached everything. He likes to be able to mix things up and kind of cater it towards like the teams that they are playing. And so I definitely would expect that, like, kind of like changing looks kind of thing. And I think it's awesome that LSU is able to execute it, right? I think we asked Jacoby in this yesterday, or I did. I was like, how are y'all able to do this? Because to me, it seems kind of complex to, you know, come out with one look and then change it within seconds, right? I mean, you have to have a high football IQ. You have to know what you're dealing with. That's something that's incredibly difficult to install within a couple months' time, right? And they all said, well, this is the most experienced part of this team. They've all been watching film for years. They've played 3-4. They've played 4-3. They've played man coverage. They played every flavor of defense that, you know, we saw them change their defense mid-season last year, and it worked. And they almost beat Bama because of it. So I think that the football IQ collectively of this defense is a huge advantage. And I think that we're going to see a lot more disguises moving forward.
That's a great point. And it sort of brings LSU's defense back to an identity that it used to have, you know, that LSU used to be associated with the last 2 years. Even 2019, we could see that defense wasn't necessarily a strong point of the team. There was always this discussion about, okay, well, is the defense tiring out because the offense is going so fast? Obviously, it was not an issue. They were just fine defensively. But the last 2 years, miscommunication problems for most of those 2 seasons. The Durante Jones, I think, did a good job, especially in the second half of last year, once he really was able to control what they wanted to do defensively. But Ed Orgeron was always talking about, oh, we've got to get so simple. And so it's kind of interesting to hear that kind of flipped on its head. It's like, well, no, these players can handle it just fine. You don't have to be like simple and running the same defensive coverage every single time. This group can handle it. And so certainly in terms of like schematic, I expect that to be the same, like you said, throughout the year, in terms of what they're kind of doing, mixing all these different looks and disguises and such. Whether or not that actually translates to the kind of game they played against Mississippi State, we'll see. Some of these teams, Tennessee really in particular comes to mind here, are going to stretch the field more vertically than Mississippi State was tried to or even was capable of doing. They were trying to go horizontal a lot, and LSU was clamped down on that. So these corners, though they've really showed up well the first 3 games, are going to get tested more, especially in that Tennessee game. I think about, you know, wide receiver Cedric Tillman and quarterback Hendon Hooker, and then even all the things that Lane Kiffin can do with Ole Miss offensively, and then not even getting into the Bama question. they'll be tested in some different ways. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how that holds up. Last thing here, just a kind of a note, how to watch you. It's got to stream the game. Melanie asks, if I'm in Baton Rouge, how can I watch the game Saturday? Well, if you're in Baton Rouge, I would recommend buying a ticket and going to the game. But if not, you're going to need to stream it either through SEC Network Plus or ESPN Plus. That's how you can watch the game this weekend if you're not actually in Tiger Stadium. And so we appreciate the question, Melanie. That's going to do it for us here for the Advocate Sports Update. Make sure to subscribe, like all those different things. Sign up for the newsletter that appears in your inbox every day with all of our LSU coverage. We'll have you covered for this game against New Mexico and every other game this season. So make sure you follow along for all of it. For Leah and everybody else at The Advocate, I'm Wilson Alexander. Thanks for watching.